So we'll be looking at calculating ROI, opportunity forecasting, and a bit of incremental forecasting as well. Off the back of this, we will have a few templates that we'll be able to share with you guys that we'll be able to download on the website. Hopefully these will be useful to you guys and will essentially just kind of streamline any forecasting that you want to do and hopefully help you with those business cases. So just a little bit about ourselves. As I was mentioned, we're Kaizen, digital marketing agency based in London. We mainly cover kind of three main areas. Digital PR is kind of what we're more known for, it's kind of the bread and butter. But we also do support on both SEO and social media. We've worked with quite a lot of large brands, Reebok, Compare the Market, Lego, Monzo, Adidas. Yeah, we essentially work really closely all together, kind of integrated cross-channel to give the best approach that we can to our clients. And then again, here we've got an example of kind of some of the clients we work with. I won't run through this, you can have a look if you're interested. A little bit about myself. I'm Ed, I'm the SEO lead here at Kaizen. I've been in the industry just over 8 years now. During that time, I've been pretty much agency side the entire time. Worked with anything from kind of really small B2B, B2C clients, bit of kind of third sector and charity, retail, and where I spent most of my time is with kind of large multinational e-commerce brands. So one of the things that I've experienced, and I imagine my experience is probably pretty universal to what we've seen, is that from an SEO perspective, it can be really challenging to get buy-in and to try and get our point across, try and get the messaging across, and to actually push forward with projects. So hopefully that is kind of the point of today, is to kind of give you a bit more kind of support in terms of how you can actually craft those business cases and get that senior level buy-in. So why is buy-in so important? So I'm going to start off with a few questions essentially, and these are actual quotes that I've had from people when I've tried to pitch SEO work. One of the most frustrating is organic traffic is free. Why should I invest in SEO? And another common one that comes up is we don't have budget or we don't have the capacity to do the work that you want to do. So when you face these questions, it can be a real uphill battle in terms of what you're trying to get the message across, because you're already dealing with somebody who's a little bit hard-headed. But one of the things that people fail to realize is that organic is the largest source of search traffic for most sites. So there's a great study by Bright Edge. They do it roughly every kind of 5 years or so. And they look at what the kind of channel share breakdown is and where that traffic comes from on sites. This is excluding direct. So this is anyone looking on kind of Google, Bing, search engines, etc., or kind of social media apps as well. What we can see is that organic is over half of that, where we've got a much smaller proportion of paid, for example, at around 15%. So essentially, half of your search traffic is coming from organic. And yeah, it might be free and you might not need to necessarily work at it if you don't want to. Ignoring it is really setting yourself up to fail, and it's putting a lot on the line and it's risking quite a lot. And I think ultimately the issue that we quite often have when we get these difficult questions is it's essentially a lack of education. But often one of the biggest challenges we face as an SEO is being able to educate those people, either because they don't have the time, they might not have the willingness to learn. But often if you're speaking to kind of really senior members or like C-suite executives, you're not going to have that chance to really kind of educate them on the really minute detail. So you need to kind of be really clear on kind of what you're working on. So that kind of leads us nicely into the kind of main point of the talk, which is actually how can you secure buy-in? How can you try and get that SEO value across? And there's three main stages that I've kind of broken it down into here. The first one is all around demonstrating value. So this is kind of using data to kind of make your point. Using forecasting, we can use ROI as well to help prove the value of the work that you do, both past and future. And hopefully that can kind of streamline those conversations and try and get a bit more buy-in. The second part that we'll cover is business casing. So how to create a clear, compelling data-led business case that can actually kind of serve you in the right way and make you get your point across. And the third bit as well is kind of being really proactive and upfront with any challenges or blockers that you face. If you're able to provide proactive solutions to those issues, again, it's not going to be a blocker later in those discussions if you're trying to push through, sign off. So the first thing before we get started is really about knowing your audience. Depending on who you are trying to get buy off and sign on with, it's going to vary how you need to approach those. More often than not, the key decision holders and maybe the budget holders are not going to be your main day-to-day stakeholders that you deal with on a regular basis, who already know the value of the work, they trust you, etc. You're most likely going to be trying to convince somebody that has no idea who you are, what you do, or why they should be spending the money. In that case, they often do not have the time to look at the detail as to why and how, and it's down to us to try and condense that, consolidate that into a really nice, simple package that they will be able to understand and they'll be able to take away. In most cases, if that is likely to be either kind of procurement, finance teams, or that kind of C-suite level executive, realistically, they're not going to care too much about the how or the why, but they are going to be really data and particularly money or revenue focused. And this is where the idea of kind of numbers speak much louder than words when it comes to this kind of business casing. And ultimately, you kind of need to be answering the question, are we getting more out than we're putting in? If not, you're going to have a really difficult struggle. So you need to kind of frame it in that reference in order to get that across, essentially. And yeah, numbers is the easiest way to kind of simplify that down. Cool. So yeah, demonstrating value. One of the easiest ways that you can prove the value of what you're doing is looking at forecasting. We're going to be covering 3 types of forecasting here. And again, we've kind of got some templates to help with this in the future. So the first one's going to be ROI forecasting. That will be looking at kind of past performance and then trying to apply the learnings to kind of future activity that you do. Opportunity forecasting, which is going to be looking at more of the size of the prize, the opportunity that's available and what you could potentially get. And then incremental forecasting, which kind of takes the learnings of the others and then applies basically what you think you'd be able to achieve and predicting that growth. So starting off with ROI forecasting, ROI is something that you guys will undoubtedly be very familiar with. And again, it's not groundbreaking. The one thing that I do find in my career that I've experienced so far is that it's very rarely used in an SEO context. Most of the time it's used for paid search. You kind of have ROI, you have ROAS, return on ad spend as well, which is something that is looked at very heavily. But from an SEO standpoint, it's not really ever considered too much of a metric, at least in my experience. Now, that might be because you're not comparing direct media costs like you would be from a paid perspective. But at the end of the day, there is kind of, usually if you have like a agency providing your SEO, there will be a fee. Or even if you don't have an agency and you're doing this in-house, there'll be a time cost element to this as well. So you can always use that to calculate the return on the amount of investment that you're putting in. But it's really helpful in terms of, one, measuring your performance historically to see how you're doing, to keep it in that whole mindset of, are we getting more out than we're putting in? And thirdly, it kind of will help with those future discussions. So most commonly when calculating ROI, it simply looks at kind of the total output kind of minus the cost and then see what that kind of difference is. One thing when we have a look at that from an SEO perspective, usually we would look at kind of traffic or revenue. Revenue is the kind of most obvious case here. But ultimately, we would tend to look at the total brand site performance to see, hey, for this bit of activity during this period, it cost us X to produce and we got X out of it. That can be good and it can provide a really clear narrative in terms of what you want to do. But one challenge that frequently occurs as well is if you're looking at the whole site, you're looking at branded and non-branded traffic. Branded traffic, organic search realistically has very little part to play in providing that search demand. So if we do see fluctuations, either positive or negative in brand search demand, that can massively skew the results from any ROI calculations and doesn't really reflect the work that you're doing. So one of the things that we always recommend to do when calculating ROI is to kind of remove that branded traffic and focus purely on the non-branded traffic. And there's quite an easy way to do that. And this is essentially what one of the templates does that we look at. But essentially in 4 simple steps, you can download your kind of data from Google Search Console, all of the query data. You can kind of, from that, work out what is branded and non-branded by filtering. or you can get the percentage of that as well. So essentially filter out your brand terms or relevant terms and have a look at the proportion of non-brand to branded traffic. Then you kind of take the normal calculation, you have a look at that increase in performance over the revenue for that period that you're looking at. And then what you can do is you can multiply that increase in performance by the percentage of non-brand clicks. Now, it's not going to be exactly 100% accurate to what that non-branded traffic will be providing you. Unfortunately, Google Analytics doesn't really give you revenue at a keyword level, which is a bit of a shame because otherwise that would be ideal. But you can use that as a bit of a proxy. And what that will give you is roughly, if you're getting 40% of your traffic is non-brand, we could probably assume that 40% of your revenue is also non-brand. If you're then able to just divide that by the SEO fee, you've then got a really clear idea of how much of that revenue that was non-branded was driven and how much that's costed you from an SEO perspective, and then divide the two. That can give you a really nice calculation, essentially, really simple calculation to see your return. And for example, this is the tool that we've created. Essentially, all you do is paste in your Google Search Console data, paste in the total revenue that you got, the fee, and then it will chuck out an ROI figure for you. And it will also chuck out the non-branded revenue for you, non-branded traffic, non-branded revenue, and also non-branded ROI. So hopefully you can use this to basically bolster any kind of business casing that you're doing. The other thing that's really good is just to use this in a general kind of day-to-day usage for any past activity that you've done. One of my kind of key kind of strategies I like to look at and kind of opportunities is retrospectively having a look at performance and actually seeing, did that drive ROI, did it drive value? And if it didn't, that activity maybe isn't something that we want to continue in the future. It can really help inform and define the strategy as well. Cool. So the second part that we're going to be looking at here is around opportunity forecasting. And again, one of the easiest ways in order to kind of try and get buy-in is to show the size of the prize that you're going after. SEO forecasting typically is a little bit finger in the air. It's a bit of guesswork. There's so many factors that are affecting performance. It's very difficult to kind of pinpoint exactly what you're going to get and how you're going to get it. But opportunity forecasting at least gives a bit of a framework and a bit of a guide as to how you can quantify the opportunity that's available and the traffic that you can look at as well. We'll run through how to kind of do this, but also it's worth noting that if you have kind of average order value, if you're kind of like in a sales business and you've got a conversion rate, you can apply that to the figures as well to give you a really good idea of what you would expect your average costs, transactions and revenue to be. If you work in an industry that doesn't necessarily have revenue and your conversions are maybe signups or registrations or kind of contact form submissions, what you can also do is you'll be able to work out how many you would expect to get. But in terms of the value of those, if you're able to assign a value either in terms of the likelihood of that lead converting later down the line and how valuable that business is to you, you can apply that in this context as well. So all the opportunity forecasting can be broken down into essentially one formula, or kind of it's relatively simple formula, or essentially three separate formulas that kind of all ladder into the same one. But essentially, in order to calculate the revenue, what you need to be looking at here is the traffic that is potentially coming, and that's calculated by looking at the monthly search volume, the number of people searching for that term each month, times by the current click-through rate at the position that you are at. That there gives you the traffic that you'd be expecting, so basically the proportion of the number of people that are searching that will come through to your site. By timesing that by the current conversion rate, you can then understand how many people of that traffic set are going to be converting. And then off the back of that as well, you can then times the number that are converting by the average order value to give you a rough calculation of revenue. So yeah, when that's broken down, essentially it's three separate calculations, but can all be done essentially in one. So one of the things that we use very, very frequently in order to kind of predict the click-through rate, which is one of the things that can vary quite substantially in this model, is essentially click-through rate curves. So hopefully you guys will be familiar with what a click-through rate curve is. Essentially, it just shows you the proportion of, or the likelihood of people clicking through at each various position. Now, calculating these can vary quite drastically depending on what industry you're looking at, what type of device you're looking at, essentially if it's branded, non-branded, etc. One thing that we use that's really, really handy is the Advanced Web Ranking case study, which is the kind of organic Google CTR case study. It's an ongoing tool, basically, that constantly is updating different click-through rates based on a really large data set. What's really helpful about that is they provide loads of different options to kind of filter the click-through rate curve down. So again, you can choose branded, non-branded, you can choose a variety of different sectors, you can choose countries, you can choose devices. So it can be really tailored to your niche and your speciality, but it's really key to make sure that you're using something that you think is accurate and representative to your business and to your target audience. But anyway, they are incredibly helpful and help us essentially determine the likelihood of the traffic that's coming through. What you're able to do as well, and this is again another tool that we have a template for that you guys can download, is if you want to build your own CTR curve yourself, you can do that through Google Search Console data. The benefit of this being it will be super targeted and relevant to the traffic that you're getting in. So you can guarantee that that's probably a more representative example of what you will get. It's worth noting that if you're a relatively small site and you're not getting too much traffic, this will be quite difficult to pick out a really nice clean curve. The more data you have, essentially, the more accurate the curve is going to be. But yeah, there's a tool there that you'll be able to download if you want to try it out for yourself. So how does this actually work though in practice? So I've just taken an example here, which is surfboards. So for example, if you were ranking in position 6 for surfboards, and you can get that position either from Google Search Console, SEMrush, Moz, Stat, Ahrefs, whatever you're using to track performance, you'll be able to pull your average position. You can then look at the monthly search volume for that term as well, either in Google Keyword Planner, again, SEMrush, Ahrefs, they'll all provide a rough idea of monthly search volume. In this case, for surfboards, it's 5,400. And then if we look at that CTR case study, we'll be able to get an idea of the branded or non-branded click-through rate at that position, and then you'll be able to go from there. As I mentioned before, we tend to have a look at non-branded because that's the bit that we will be able to affect. And essentially, yeah, it's just a case of having a look at the CTR curve, where it is, and then seeing what the value is. So when we then apply that into the model, in terms of getting traffic, it's simply search volume times the position click-through rate. So in this case, we've got 5,400 monthly searches, and the click-through rate at position 6 is 2.45. So we would expect of that 5,400 people searching, 132 of them will click through to the site. To then work out the transactions, it's simply a case of taking that traffic number and timesing it by the conversion rate. So here we've got that 132 clicks. If, for example, the conversion rate was around 1.6%, we would expect for every 132 clicks, roughly just about 2 people would end up converting and buying. And then again, really simply, to calculate the revenue of this, we simply take that transactional figure and multiply that by the average order value. So we take 132 clicks, which is roughly 2 people buying, with an average order value of around £326. That leaves you essentially with £691 revenue that you could expect from that 5,400 people searching. So again, this is not going to be 100% accurate, but provides a really good proxy and a really good template for what you potentially could achieve if you were in position 6. And again, that's it, just wrapped up. What's really valuable here is, whilst that's a really simple calculation and you can do that per keyword, if you multiply that across all of the keywords that you could potentially rank for or that you want to rank for, you can then build out a really comprehensive view of the potential opportunity and traffic at each different position. So if you were currently ranking in position 10, you would get X. If you were ranking in position 5, you'd get this much, position 4, etc., etc., etc. And what we've done is we built out a bit of a template that you can essentially bulk upload your keywords and the monthly search volume and your current ranking position. And what it will do is it will check out what you're currently estimated to achieve. And again, it will be a rough estimate of what you're currently achieving. It will then give you the total opportunity. So that is the total amount you could possibly get if you were to rank in position 1 for all of that traffic. And then we'll break it down at different levels. So we've looked at position 1, position 3, and position 5, which realistically are going to be the traffic driving positions. So By uploading your keyword set, and again, it's not limited by the number of keywords, you can add in as many as you want, you'll be able to build a really good view of the total opportunity that you can use. And again, this is a really valuable tool in terms of trying to get that buy-in, and that's kind of senior stakeholder level, mainly because they can then clearly see, hey, we're only getting, I don't know, a small proportion of this traffic, when actually there is a huge amount available that we're not currently tapping into. Where we can then take this to another level as well and kind of enhance it a bit further is to have a look at the average CPC for each of those keywords as well. So if you're downloading your keyword data from Keyword Planner, it will also provide you the average cost per click if you were to pay for that keyword in paid search. Now, what's really good is we can put, again, that CPC into that table. And what it will do is it will tell us we're expecting 10,000 sessions or 10,000 amount of clicks from this keyword being in position 1. If we were to pay 10p per click, this is how much it would cost you from a paid search perspective. Now, that can be really good kind of comparison tool to show the value of SEO, because essentially you don't have that media fee, and that is the media cost that's going to cost you. So if you have an agency providing your digital marketing, you'll have the SEO fee, obviously, in terms of creating that content, setting it live, the optimization. But likewise, from a paid search perspective, you still have that management fee of managing the accounts, managing Google Ads, updating ads, etc. But you also have that paid media cost. And if you're able to show the amount that media cost will be, it's really easy to say, look, SEO is only going to cost you, I don't know, £2,000, whereas the media cost for the same amount of traffic will cost you £10,000. That's a very easy way to kind of make a really clear comparison and to get kind of a bit more SEO buy-in. The other thing to note here as well is that SEO growth and the work that you do from SEO traffic is kind of incremental value. So you basically will set the optimizations live, and that will keep converting, and that will keep growing. Once it's set up, it will continue to convert and grow revenue. From a paid search perspective, it will only get traffic and revenue when it is active, and that will always have a cost associated to it. So yeah, SEO is incremental, PPC is one and done. And again, that's another way that you can kind of push those conversations in your favor. Cool. So the final part to this as well is kind of utilizing that kind of opportunity forecasting and that methodology into incremental forecasting. So typically with forecasting, the way that it looks at is we'll look at kind of historic performance, we'll look at past performance, we'll look at current trends, current data, to try and work out what the current trend is and if it's going to kind of keep going and kind of exponentially just track that along. Now, that can work and it can be quite useful. Again, it doesn't really take into account a lot of the nuance, a lot of the factors that come into play from an SEO perspective. And again, where you're likely to be influenced by kind of non-brand traffic, by branded traffic, we want to filter that out and we want to focus on what's really going to work, which is that non-brand growth. So the way in which we tend to do this is using the same methodology as the opportunity forecasting. We take your current ranking, what we would expect the performance to be, the current transactions, the revenue, etc. And then what you can do is you can then apply essentially a monthly uplift to each of those things based on the activity that you want to carry out. So if, for example, you know that you're going to have a really clearly defined SEO strategy this year, you're going to really ramp it up as you go out through the year, you can apply a small essentially multiplier or uplift to each month to basically show what you think that increase in ranking performance will be based on the activity you do. Off the back of that, as you go up each position based on the activity, it will then forecast your predicted traffic, your predicted revenue, etc. This is really valuable because, again, where this is going to be super critical is it's on the keywords that you think you can work on, that you think you'll be able to optimize, and it's super targeted for the work that you're doing. So it's filtering out all of that unnecessary data around kind of branded traffic or things that are out of your control and focuses purely on this is the thing that we control and this is what we expect to get out of it at the end. So it's a really valuable tool to use and leverage. The one thing to be a bit wary of is it's not a hard science. And calculating incremental uplifts will be pretty subjective ultimately. And in order to be as representative of what you want to do, you want to make sure that you're considering a few areas. So the first one being the keywords that you're using. Are they actually realistic for what you are going to be optimizing? Are they representative of what you're targeting? Are they actually your target keywords that you want to go after? If they're not, you're going to be predicting growth in something that actually probably won't grow if you're not working on it. The second one is performance. What is your current performance looking like? Is the website struggling to rank already? So essentially, are you going to actually be able to see really fast growth because your website's already growing, or actually have you stagnated? Are your rankings declining? If they're already declining, you're not necessarily going to see that keyword growth. So you might need to downweight that kind of multiplier to be reflective of current performance. The third one here is SEO activity. So understanding what you're actually doing throughout the year, because it will have different peaks, it will have different troughs. Deliverables will go live at different times, and they'll have a bit of a knock-on effect later. We usually say that there's kind of around kind of 6 weeks to 3 months for results to start to show. They can show quicker than that, they can take longer than that, but you need to factor that into when you expect that kind of multiplier and that growth to hit. And you also need to think, are there any big projects coming up that are going to influence this? Is it just BAU? Or actually, if we redesign the site and we're changing all the URL structure, is that going to massively impact the weighting or the potential ranking uplifts later on? The next stage here as well is competition. What are you looking like at the moment in relation to the competition? Are they ahead of you? Are they behind you? Are they suddenly growing massively? Are they not growing? Are they declining? Are you? And all of that kind of, again, puts in perspective as to where you think and the level of growth that you'd be expecting. The other thing that's often overlooked as well is other activity that's done by other channels. PPC is the main one usually that has an impact on SEO. That's because essentially you are competing in the same results page for the same query. And you want to make sure that there's no chance of cannibalization there. So if you do think that PPC are going to have a lot of activity, you need to take that into account into your uplifts. And then finally, throughout the year, are we expecting any kind of big marketing pushes, product services or launches or anything like that that you might need to be aware of? Again, it can influence potential uplift and the surge in search volume. So just be wary of that. But ultimately, uplift should be based on where you want to go, what you think you'll be able to achieve. But ultimately, you need to be realistic about what those kind of uplifts are going to be, because you don't want to over forecast or under forecast. Cool. So that essentially was the first section on demonstrating value. The second part, we will be looking at business casing, and so how to create a compelling business case, essentially. And the reason why this is so important is because a business case is your opportunity to showcase and demonstrate that value. It's your opportunity to stand in front of the actual decision makers and try and convince them, essentially, of getting sign-off. But because you need to convince them, often it's one of your only opportunities to do this. Many times you won't have a chance to refine the business case and produce lots of business cases for the same project. And that's, again, because time is a factor and they won't necessarily have the time to review that. So as a result, it's really key to make sure that you have got everything you need in that first chance, because you've got one shot, to make sure that they have an informed decision. Because if they don't have enough data or they're unsure, they're not going to make a decision in your favor. So you need to make sure they've got literally everything they could possibly need. So in order to meet that, here are kind of some of the things that you should look to be including when you make your business case. The first one is really an understanding of the wider business goals. Ultimately, unless the person you're trying to convince has knowledge of your channel or your area, they're more focused on the overall business goals. If you're able to ladder the objectives of your project into that wider business strategy, they'll be able to relate to it much more easily, and therefore they're more likely to get sign off. So if the overall business goal is to, I don't know, get more revenue from a particular type of client, if you are able to demonstrate how that will impact that client and that growth, that's going to be much more valuable than if you're just saying, hey, we're getting traffic to the website. Secondly, you want to make sure that you've got really defined, clear objectives. You know what you want to get out of this project and why you're doing it. You then also need to have clear outcomes, so what you're kind of expecting that outcome to be, and that is really where that kind of data point comes from. And this really should be kind of the crux of your business case. It should be the why and it should be the how, but more importantly, it should be what are you going to get out of this. And again, going back to that first point, which is, are you getting more than what you're putting in? And that's really where you need to define that. If you're having trouble or struggling to define that nice and clearly, look to get some kind of additional supporting data. So that can either be from kind of other company case studies, it can be industry news, it can be basically anything that will help support your case. Additional sources, again, help kind of that validity and that trust that what you're suggesting is viable and is going to work. So you really want to kind of leverage as much supporting data as you can. One of the other areas that I often see missed out of business cases, and actually is really valuable and definitely goes a long way, is being really clear about the level of input that's involved from people, what is expected of them, and like where they're needed. Because ultimately, if the CEO or C-suite executive is trying to look at this and they're thinking, am I going to have to be involved in this? I don't really want to be. You can be super clear, actually, it doesn't need any of your time. It's all going to be the junior staff or whatever, and it's only going to take this much amount of time. Being super clear and upfront at the beginning is really important at kind of understanding what is needed from everyone. The other side of this as well is being super upfront and clear about any sort of either mitigating factors or potential challenges that you're going to face. What you need to really do, and this is one of the sections that we'll touch upon next, is trying to identify those roadblocks before you hit them. If they come to you with challenges that are going to potentially block or delay the project, you need to be able to have solutions in your back pocket to already whip out and be like, actually, that's not a problem because of X, or we've already thought about that and this is why. You need to be providing those solutions, because if they think there are going to be multiple hurdles that you need to climb that you haven't already thought about, again, that's just something that doesn't work in your favor. So if you're able to convince them otherwise and preempt that, it can be very, very valuable. So on the industry case studies point, this is something that I've used several times and it's been really, really valuable. Some parts of SEO are really difficult to quantify as well, but being able to put a figure to it can be really, really helpful. It can also help with any reporting that you're doing as well. And a good example of this is page speed. So page speed is quantifiable, obviously. We're able to check kind of load times. There's loads of data around kind of core web vitals metrics, kind of the cumulative layout shift or first input delay. All of those have figures, right? And we can quantify that. But ultimately, with that, it's very difficult to tie that to kind of revenue, because what does a 2-second increase in first input delay actually mean? We know that page speed is a direct ranking factor in terms of keyword performance. So we need to try and quantify that in some way. And one way in which this has worked in the past, at least for me, is using an industry case study. So I used a case study by Deloitte called Milliseconds Make Millions. And they did a study, it was pretty broad actually. I think they looked at 21 million users across, I think it was maybe like 150 e-commerce brands and loads of other brands as well, in order to track what happens if we see an increase in performance in page speed. What does that look like in terms of traffic, conversions, revenue, etc.? What they found off the back of this was that on average, at least across retail consumers, a 0.1 second page speed increase led to an increase of 8.4% in conversions and a 9.2% increase in AOV. Personally, I think that is very optimistic. And I would be incredibly surprised if you saw a 0.1% or a 0.1 second increase and it led to these results. But they do have evidence to back that up. And how I've used this in the past is as an example of how it could impact it. So I'm not saying necessarily in my business case that you will get an 8.4%, but we can clearly see that there is a correlation between improving page speed and improvement in performance and revenue. And that was enough in order to help prioritize some tech tickets in my case to get that signed off. And off the back of that, they did see an improvement and they did see revenue go up. It's very difficult to tie that revenue directly to that page speed, but at least it helped push that initial conversation and it got the project live. And then afterwards, they still saw a good positive result. So they were happy with the conclusion. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is try and use case studies that are in the industry. I'm not saying that they're always going to be one-for-one and super accurate and detailed, but you can at least apply the learnings from that as a bit of kind of a representation of what you could achieve. The other part here as well that's really important is if you are kind of unable to prove the value or demonstrate the value of the activity that you want to do, either from forecasting or ROI, it's not quite working in the same way, because sometimes a project might not have a revenue focus. What might happen as well is they might challenge that and they might struggle to kind of get your point across. What works really well is flipping the narrative. So rather than arguing what's going to work and what's going to bring in revenue, you can say, hey, this is the cost of inaction. So if we don't do this, this is how much it's going to cost us. And the easiest way to do this is a bit of a threat about competitors, to be completely honest. So if you're able to show that, hey, our competitors are hugely growing in this space and we're not, whilst we've got traffic and revenue coming in now, the projected growth of these companies is going to massively outperform us. And if we don't do anything now, we're going to be lost and we're going to fall behind and we're going to lose revenue. That is often a really good motivational driver for them. And one thing, again, that's worked well for me is kind of, I like to think of it as kind of striking them in their ego a little bit. Showing how well their competitors, their biggest competitors, are doing really can knock their confidence. So I had a client that basically was an industry leader. They had the main competitor, their main rival, who was always in second place, and they were quite substantially ahead. So they were all happy. I showed them a graph where essentially their competitor was miles ahead, particularly in terms of backlink performance. And they saw that they were actually about fourth out of 5 in the kind of competitor landscape, where usually they see themselves as being the very top dog. So as soon as I showed that graph, the stakeholder that I was dealing with, who was pretty senior, honestly, all he could think about is, how can we catch up and beat these guys, because they shouldn't be beating us in this area. And that's something that you can kind of lean and you can put pressure on to kind of drive your point home. And some great ways of doing this as well. SEMrush has some great kind of visibility tools. So does kind of Ahrefs and loads of the other kind of rank tracking software. But if you are tracking your keywords, you should be able to see kind of competitor share of voice where you sit in that space. So I've got an example here again, surfboards. You can see that at the bottom, this blue Tiki Surf site is not ranking for very many keywords and it's not getting very much traffic. If your main competitors are Secret Spot, which is the big pink circle there, you can clearly see, hey, they're ranking for more, but they are getting substantially more traffic. This is why we need to kind of do the work that we're doing, not to necessarily gain more traffic, but to stop them from getting more. And so you can use share of voice, you can use kind of competitive positioning. Again, visibility metrics are really helpful for this. And again, you can also look at forecasting competitor growth as well. Sometimes you'll be able to kind of get the ranking data from your competitors, from the likes of SEMrush. Again, you can put that into the thing and say, hey, we expect them to be getting this much traffic and they're growing this quickly. We need to put a stop to this. So this is a really valuable tool that you can use if you're struggling to get those decisions signed off and you're getting met with a bit of resistance. Cool. And so that leads us to the final part, which is, again, as I touched upon earlier, providing active solutions and workflows, being super upfront about any challenges that you've got and proactively providing solutions. So yeah, as I mentioned, blockers are something that can really hamper any sort of business case and can shut it down completely if the blocker is substantial enough. So what you want to make sure to do is to just preempt any challenges, literally anything, no matter how big or small. Even if it's worst case scenario, what would you do to counter that if that were to happen? At least have a bit of a plan. It doesn't need to be kind of data led in the same way, but you at least need to come prepared with solutions and that look to provide that. If you don't, and they come up with a challenge on the spot and you're a bit unsure of what to do, it's going to really hamper your chances. So by having that kind of preparedness, it not only makes you look prepared and more considered, but it also takes away a blocker that they potentially would have in that process. And then the final bit that I wanted to touch upon as well is around kind of turning your stakeholders into advocates. I think that, and it sounds a bit weird, but one of our key jobs as an SEO is to make our stakeholders look good. Our job is to make our stakeholders look good. And the reason is our success is their success. If we can make them look good in front of their bosses and feel responsible for part of that success and that growth, that reflects well on them. And it basically makes them stronger advocates. So they then have more kind of somebody, essentially they're fighting in your corner to help boost those conversations. And one way that you can even do this is you can be thinking not just around kind of your day-to-day work, but you should be having those conversations with your stakeholders like, hey, what does your next job look like? How can I get you to get a promotion? What can we do to drive that? Is it a case that we need to do something really big, really strong that really showcases the skill and thought here. You can be the driving force behind that. And if you're able to kind of boost their career internally and make them look good, again, they'll be much more in your corner, and they'll fight for you more strongly. Cool. So that was kind of everything that I wanted to cover today. The kind of key takeaways from here: know your audience. There's no point giving a load of long waffly explanations as to how and why if you're dealing with people with very little time that are very numbers oriented. Focus just on the numbers. If you've got people that are more detail oriented, go into the detail there, but be sure to tailor whatever you're doing to be the audience of whoever's going to sign off and whoever's going to have that decision-making ability. The second part here is let the data do the heavy lifting. Numbers speak louder than words. Don't, again, try and waffle too much. Be really clear and concise in what you're going to achieve, and numbers are the easiest way to do that. The third part of this is creating compelling business case. So based on the previous two and of everything we discussed earlier, making sure that you've got everything that you need to make a really informed decision for your project. And then the final part as well, turning your stakeholders into advocates so that if they do get met with difficult conversations, they can be in your corner to back you up and support you.